In this video I'm going to demonstrate a quick workflow for creating a simple seamless texture, one that can be tiled and easily applied to simple 3D surfaces. So I've got my copy of Firefox open here, and I'm going to go to a website that I like to use called myang.com/textures. And this is a great resource for completely free texture resources. So it's essentially just images of found materials, natural, man-made. And the one I'm interested in this week is flat textures, wood. And I think I'm going to do an example using this one here, which is just wooden floorboards. So I'm just going to click on that, right click and save the image. And I've already got it, but I'm going to overwrite it here and call that good. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into GIMP, and I'm going to show you how we can turn that into something that's tileable. So let me start by opening up this image here, which is just wooden floorboards. And you can see that, well, for one thing, this wouldn't tile nicely because it's got several problems. It's got the lens distortion, so you can see the floorboards are distorting, which is an added problem with this, and that's because the lens has been zoomed right out, which causes that distortion to happen. And the other thing is that we've got inconsistency in the lighting. You can see that it's darker on the left and brighter on the right. So if you try to tile this straight off, you get something like this. So I'm going to go to Layers, and I'll go down to Transform Offset. It brings up the little dialog box. I like to just click on Offset by X2, Y2, and click Offset. And all it does is it moves the image to the right by half and down by half, and essentially puts the seams that were on the edge into the middle. And you can see this would be very problematic. It's not going to tile at all nicely, so it would look terrible. So let's undo that, Control Z, and start talking about how we can prepare this for tiling. So the first thing I think I'm going to try and do is correct this lens distortion that we've got, and can actually go to Filters, Distorts, and down to Lens Distortion. This brings up a little dialog here which you can expand, and we can see, actually this is my previous value that I put in here, so let me undo that. You get this real-time preview. If I were to drag this main slider all the way, you can see that you can actually undo and in fact reverse the lens distortion, so you can see it's distorting in the other direction now. So a simple way to correct this distortion would be just to drag this slider to a value where you feel the joins in these floorboards are perfectly straight and no longer bending. And a value that worked for me was somewhere around 10, something like that. Just click on OK, and it removes the lens distortion and pops it out. Now the next problem is that we'll have a little bit of rotation in these floorboards. So you can notice that we've got these rulers on the left and on the top. And what's cool about this is if you click on the ruler and drag down, you bring a guide down. And if I bring a guide to there and bring another guide down to, say, here, you can see that the floorboards aren't perfectly straight. And it's very easy to fix this, and this is just being caused by perspective. The area on the right is bowing away from us, and so it shows us that the camera was slightly closer to the floor on the left and slightly angled to the right. So what we need to do to correct this is look for a perspective filter. Well, actually it's a perspective transform, and it's found under the Tools menu. Go down to Transform Tools and Perspective, and you can see it brings up this handy grid for you. You've got these little controllers on the corners, and you just click on these, and you can see I can actually distort this quite severely, but I just want to nudge it up to try and get the floorboards to move straight up and down, or straight left to right I should say, to match those blue dotted guides that I have going across the image. So I'll just tweak that. That's good enough. And when I'm done, just click on Transform on the dialog box, adjusts the perspective, and straightens out the image. Alright. Let me just drag my guides away here so they're not snapping. I need my selection tools. Next I need to grab an area of this image that I'd like to use as my square tileable texture. And so what I'm going to do is use my rectangular marquee tool here, and I'm going to start somewhere up here, and you'll notice that I'm actually doing it right where that join is on the plank, so these planks will seem to just join naturally. If I hold down the Shift key, I can constrain to a perfect square. If I bring this down to about here, roughly there, I've got a nice square that I can use and make my tileable texture from. So what I'm going to do is actually crop down to this portion of the square, and we'll move on from there. So I just go to Image and crop to Selection, and now my texture is starting to make sense. So let's try offsetting this now. Let's go to Layer, Transform, Offset, and again we'll do Offset, X2, Y2, Offset. Okay, so if I zoom into this, we can see a little better. I'm just going to do Shift plus to zoom in. You can see that the floorboards line up fairly well now, not perfect. Let me hit the minus key to zoom out. The biggest problem is that lighting shift from left to right. You can see that originally if I reset the offset, if I go to Layer, Transform, Offset, Offset X2, Y2 and Offset, you can see that the left side is darker than the right side. And there are several ways to fix this. But I'm going to show you one tip that I've sort of built up over the years that I like to do for this kind of problem. So what I'll do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. I've got my layers panel on the right, and I just select my layer and just click on the little duplicate button here, and it creates a copy. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lighten the top copy, and I'm going to lighten it so much that the left darker side will effectively match the right side of the image underneath. So the right side is going to get blown out, but we're going to hide that later on. And so what I'm going to do is then selectively decide how much of this top layer to show and reveal over the bottom layer. That might not make sense, but it will very shortly. So what I'll do is I'm going to go to Colors, making sure I've got this upper layer selected, Colors, and Brightness Contrast. And I'm just going to drag this slider to the right, and you see how it brightens it up? Now it's difficult at this point because it brightens the whole image, so it's really tricky to tell if I'm doing it too much or not enough. So let's cancel this and let's do something else first. Let's selectively hide the right half of this image on this layer. So what I'm going to do is add what's known as a layer mask. So I go to Layer, and I go down to, see, Masks, Add Layer Mask, and just click on Add. And this little white box appears to the right. Now a layer mask is really clever. Essentially, if I hit the Alt key and click on the white box, this is the mask. It's all white right now, which means that this layer shows 100% over the whole layer. If I just click Alt and back on that box, it hides the mask again. Now, if I were to paint black anywhere on this mask, it would hide that area of this layer, hide it completely from view. So I could quickly demo that, in fact. Let's just bring up a paintbrush, and what I'm going to do is quickly just scribble, oops, not on the layer mask itself, on the image. If I scribble all over this layer, you can see that I can hide and show the layer with the little eyeball. If I click on the layer mask, Alt click, wherever I paint black on the layer mask, it now hides that layer. Alt click again to show it, and you can see that where I drew that line of black, it's hidden that from view. It's essentially hidden that portion of the layer. So it's very clever and very, very useful. So to use that more appropriately, what I'm going to do is actually apply a gradient to this. So I'm going to go to my gradient tool, and I'm going to choose a gradient from the gradients on the right here. So I click on the little tab here with gradients, and I'm going to do, let's see, we want foreground to background. In other words, black to white. And what I'm going to do is look at my layer mask by doing Alt-click. I'm going to drag roughly from the left to just a little under halfway. And I'm going to create this black edge here that fades into white. You can click and drag as many times as you want to kind of perfect it. And so what we're doing is we're hiding this layer where it's black and showing this layer where it's white. Now that's almost the reverse of what I want really. So let's drag in the other direction. Let's drag from the right to the left, and we've got black to white. So I'm going to show the layer on the left and hide it on the right. That's good. So now, if I Alt-click on the layer mask to reveal that layer again, now watch what happens when I apply my colors, brightness, contrast. When I drag these sliders, let me cancel this. Make sure you've got your layer selected, otherwise I was adjusting the brightness contrast of my adjustment layer. So colors, brightness, contrast, and as I adjust this slider, notice how it only affects the left side of the image, which is where that layer mask is revealing that portion of the layer, and it's revealing essentially the layer underneath on the right hand side. So I need to brighten up the left side of the image so it roughly matches the right side. This is very much kind of doing it by eye. Maybe a value of 26. It's fairly close. Let's try it. Click OK. And what we'll need to do now is reapply the offset. So I'm just going to go right click on this layer and I'm going to go merge down, because you can only apply that offset to one layer at a time. So I'm compressing that into one layer again. Layer, transform, offset. Offset by x2, y2, and click offset. And you can see that it's close, not perfect, but it's close. You know, I think it's close enough for what we're going to do. So if I were probably doing this again, you know, for a real texture, I'd probably just undo, and I'd undo a couple of steps, and I would just lighten up the left side of the image a little bit more. But that's close enough for what we need. So let me zoom in on this, and we'll talk about the next phase. We need to clean up these seams. So Shift+ to zoom in, and holding down the spacebar key allows you to move your zoomed in image around. Now I'm going to use the clone tool here to sort of blend the left side of the image to the right side and try and cover up those two seams. It's going to be a little rough and ready because I'm just sort of giving you a general workflow in this video, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So the clone tool is here in my tools palette, and there's a couple of things you need to be aware of. By default, your opacity is set right up at 100, and you can lower that opacity down just by clicking in the opacity option. Now I'm using a graphics tablet here, so I've got pen pressure. If you don't have that luxury, you're just using a mouse, you just want to use a lower opacity and just build it up in strokes. A feature that I really like with the clone tool is this option down here, which is alignment. And I want to make sure my alignment is set to aligned. You can just do that with the drop down box there. And what that does is when you let go, it doesn't reset your clone source back to where it was. It just keeps it aligned with where your brush is, so you can just paint a lot more intuitively. So we pick a source to clone from, and I'm going to use my control key and just click to say I want to copy this area of the image. And then what we do is we just simply paint, and it copies the left area to wherever I'm painting. Now, let me undo this. One problem here, if you clone a source there, say I'm cloning this seam of these boards, and you start painting up here, then that board seam appears there. So a little tip is to click on a seam, and then click on the seam on the opposite side of the image, and then that sets your clone source so they're aligned, so that those seams are nicely aligned. And I'm just sort of carefully painting this across. You want to be careful with things like this knot, which are repeating, that can kind of ruin a tiling texture. And to change the size of my brush, I can just use the square bracket keys on the keyboard, or I can use this size option here and just click up and down. So I'm just going to paint to clean up this texture. Just painting the left side of the image and just sort of trying to blend it over to the right side. And again, the right side is a little darker than the left side, so my texture is not going to be that great, but it'll be good enough. I'll hold space just to move the image. Just kind of clean this up. All the way across, and you could spend longer doing this to make it look better, but what you might want to do is just do some other clones from other parts of the image to hide obvious repeats, like these areas I had here. Let's see, this knot that I have here is kind of an obvious repeat, so let's get rid of those. And then this knot here, just to try and get rid of some of these more obvious parts. So, hit the minus key to zoom out. And that's our texture more or less finished, at least for this example. If you wanted to, you could use your colors and you could use your brightness contrast to sort of tweak that texture if you wanted to bump up the contrast a little bit. Maybe take the brightness down, click OK, and you could change some other properties there. But that's good enough. So what I need to do now is I need to save this out as a PNG file that I can use in 3D Studio as a texture. I want to be careful though. If I look at the top of the screen, you'll notice that my image is quite large. It's 1840 by 1840. And for a tileable texture, especially if you're doing this for something like games, you want to make sure that your textures aren't too large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Image and Scale Image. And I'm just going to bring this down to 1024 by 1024. And because it's a perfect square, those numbers should correlate perfectly. Click Scale. And then I've got a nice scaled image that's ready to save. Now in GIMP you don't actually go File, Save As to save to a different file format. You can only save to native GIMP formats in that way. We actually need to go down to Export, and I'm going to export this. I'm going to call it, I'll overwrite this one I did earlier, Wood Tile, and then in the options box down here you can select the format that you want. I like to use PNG. And just click on Export. And it's saved. So let's jump into 3D Studio. And for this example, I'm just going to use a simple plane. I haven't got a nice scene set up, but you'll be able to see how this works. So I'll just go to my Create tab and click on, let's see, let's just do a plane. And I'll just drag that out. That's what I'm going to put my floor texture on. So I'm going to open up my slate material editor, which is this guy here. And I'll delete the one I created earlier. I'm just going to double click on standard to create a new material for this floor. Double click on that and I can rename this to something like floor material. And you can tweak these, the specularity and the glossiness and that kind of thing to your liking. It's kind of a dull floor though because it's soft wood. Anyway, I'm going to link in to my diffuse color that texture that I just created. So I just double click on the input for diffuse color and select bitmap. And then select that PNG that I saved. Here's the original file I downloaded and here's the PNG that I just created. Click on open. Let's bring this across here. You can see it's plugged into the diffuse color there. So I just select my material, make sure my plane is selected, and then click on this guy here, Assign Material to Selection. Now, you'll have to go to your Viewport Settings, Materials, and Realistic Materials with Maps to show that texture on your plane. And you can see that it's showing up there. Now the problem is, by default, a square texture on a plane will simply fill the whole plane, so my planks are huge and it completely defeats the purpose of making it tileable. So it's very easy to quickly tile this on a plane. We need to apply a modifier known as a UVW modifier. We click on our modifier list with the plane selected, and I'm going to hit U, and I'll do UVW map. And if you scroll down the options here, you can see tile. And so as I increase the tile, you can see how it repeats the texture in that direction. So say I wanted to do 4 by 4, 4 repeats. You can see that my texture is now tiling 4 by 4, and it's not the greatest tiling texture in the world. It's certainly not going to win any awards, but you can see that we can't see the seams easily. This plank running down the middle is a little off-putting because that kind of throws the repeat off. But essentially that's how we create a tileable texture in GIMP and quickly apply it using the UVW map modifier in 3D Studio Max. Thanks for watching.